Hello. So last time I talked about my son's illness, and I mentioned that I lived in Japan, and my son was born there. Um, so I think I want to talk about some of the difficulties that I had um, compared to living here and living in Japan. How um, well, first I'll talk about their medical system. So in Japan, they have a single payer medical system. So um, everybody pays into the everybody pays like a monthly bill for their basically medical insurance. It's called a national health insurance, and um, they get so everybody pays. The amount they pay is based on their family's income, but everybody pays. There's nobody that pays zero. So, and the minimum is it's actually a little expensive if you're really poor. You're still gonna end up paying like the equivalent of like $100 a month for insurance. More if you have kids. So it's actually a little expensive, and there's also there's also copays. So if you go, but the copay is also based on your income. So if you're really low income, normally you won't pay anything for, like, if you go to the doctor or if you get medicine, it will be really a really small copay, like maybe $20 or something. So, and also dental is included in that insurance. So um, that's one of the big things, I think, dental, because I'll give you an example. I had a crown. I had a crown done, years ago when I was in Japan, and I was kind of in the lowest income bracket for insurance, so I didn't pay a really high copay. But I think, like, I, I would say in total for the I had a root canal and then I had a crown put on, and the whole thing probably cost me maybe a couple $100, maybe, or even less than that, maybe $100. I don't remember now, but um, it was cheap. And um, here, man, just for anything dental is outrageous. But back to the medical things. So they do have insurance, but insurance is kind of um, it's for it's for covering that. So if you're most people that get insurance are kind of in the higher income brackets, so it helps to cover those copays, kind of thing. But it's really cheap. It's not expensive because the maximum amount you would have to pay is capped. So even if you had like a major surgery, um, you're not gonna pay you're not gonna pay a huge amount of money. I guess probably at the most a few thousand if you had like a really major surgery and your income bracket was really high. My son has spent a lot of time in the hospital when I lived there, and I remember he stayed 2 weeks in the hospital one time, and um, I ended up paying like $300 or $400 for that, which for me was really hard because I had to stay in the hospital with him, and I wasn't making any income at that time. So there's also a difference between hospitals there and here, right? So uh, here you're really encouraged to get out of the hospital as soon as you can, right? Because of cost. But there, people tend to stay in the hospital for a really long time, like double. I would say double or triple the amount of time for an equivalent um, treatment that you would get here. So like my son, he spent a couple weeks in the hospital, but the other difference is if you have a child that goes into the hospital, here, like in America, usually, the parents will go home and the kid will stay there by himself. But in Japan, that's not allowed. So if you have like a young child, like in my case, he was like, he went a lot of times, but like, for example, when he was 6, um, I had to stay the entire time. I mean, there's no bed. There's just a bench, and I had to sleep on that bench or in the bed with my son for 2 weeks. It was a nightmare. So just kind of the entire system and how they approach things are really different, and they have like a whole lot of cost cutting there compared to in America because they don't pay the outrageous amounts of money that we do for care, so they don't have a lot of money, so they have to cut costs in a lot of weird ways that it would seem really strange for Americans, I guess. But as far as the actual care or the doctors, they're excellent. I don't really notice any difference between the kind of care that you get there and that you would get here, except for the fact that, you know, besides the doctors, the overall experience of being in the hospital, I would say, is you get what you pay for. So in America, it's a lot better, I guess. But you also get hit by that cost. So that's kind of the difference, I guess. When I lived there, as I had lived there for a lot of years, and then I raised my kids for the most part there, and then when I came back to America, I had to, I didn't have when I first arrived in America, I didn't have a job, so I was on Medicaid, and my son was on Medicaid, and man, it's really hard. It's really hard. There's a lot of hurdles. What will be covered by Medicaid and what's not covered. And when I was in Arkansas, it wasn't that bad. But after I moved to California, my son is on Medi-Cal, and there's kind of networks, and Medi-Cal covers. Medi-Cal pays for our private insurance, but there's some doctors that are allowed and some are not, and you have to find doctors that are in your. It's a real hassle, and then what they cover, is, they cover dental in some cases, and in other cases they don't, and yeah, so I would say that I guess there's a lot of there's plus and minuses that I've noticed in living in Japan and here, but I would say overall the simplicity of the system in Japan is a huge positive. I can imagine that there's a whole lot of people in America that just can't, especially when you have disabilities, or you have some mental or physical challenges. There is just no way, even if you're on a a government medical system like Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California, it's just too hard to handle. All of the hoops you got to jump through to see a doctor, and to get the kind of care you need. Plus, just getting on the phone with somebody for help takes hours in a lot of cases. I just recently moved from a different place from a different address to a new address, and I had to call and deal with my son's Medi-Cal changing the address, and it took a couple hours to get a hold of somebody and explain the situation. And it's just a little minor administrative thing, but yeah. So I I feel for I really feel for people that have challenges. It must be impossible, and then people are gonna slip through the cracks for sure. So um, yeah, I went from that system in Japan to now my son is seeing a lot of doctors here, and his doctors are good, and um, his treatment I would say is it's it's top notch, but the hassle is also top notch. Dealing with insurance and these kind of things. It's really a lot of heartburn. So I just wanted to kind of give my perspective on the differences between Japan and here. Maybe next time I'll talk a little bit about um, quality of life and how and what's life like in Japan, especially if you have a disabled child, compared to what's life like here, having raising a child with special needs. So there's a lot of differences, and I'll talk about it next time if you're interested. Okay. Thank you for your time.